All right, we are now live. I'd like to welcome all of you on Facebook or later on those who might be viewing this on YouTube to our panel on war tax resistance to kick off tax season 2021. We have a distinguished panel of 5 war tax resistors who between them, I believe, have over 140 years of war tax resistance experience. Our panel today includes Kathy Kelly, Erica Leigh, Sam Yerger, Charlie Hurst, and Maria Smith. We'll be doing this in a panel format. Each of them will be talking for about 10 minutes. And then we'll be taking questions afterwards. And as right before each person speaks, I'll be giving a little longer introduction to who is about to speak. So this panel is sponsored by the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, known as NUTRIC for short. We're the only national group in the United States dedicated to war tax resistance. On our website, which is our initials, NUTRIC, nwtrcc.org, all of our resources are available for free. We try to provide support and community to those interested in those practicing war tax resistance. As we are just starting a new administration, we hope that this panel, which includes war tax resistors who became which includes folks who became war tax resistors during the Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, W. Bush, and Obama administrations. These folks that became war tax resistors during different Democratic and Republican administrations will share why they became war tax resistors, some of their experiences, and probably why they'll continue to do so during the Biden administration. So we'll start off this afternoon with Kathy Kelly. Kathy Kelly is a peace activist, pacifist, and author. She co-founded Voices in the Wilderness and coordinated Voices for Creative Nonviolence, campaigns which worked for 25 years to end US military and economic warfare. She has helped organize numerous actions calling for an end to US complicity with the Saudi-led war in Yemen. She has lived alongside people enduring invasion and bombing in Iraq, Afghanistan, Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Bosnia. Kathy Kelly has been imprisoned in US federal prison 3 times for nonviolent protest. And since 1980, as a war tax resistor, she has refused all payment of federal income tax. So I'll leave it to you, Kathy.
Well, Lincoln, thank you very, very much. And my thanks to all of the people who have been stalwarts in maintaining NUTRIC. It's such an important organization here in the United States, and I think also communicates a strong message beyond. It was good for me to get ready for this panel because Lincoln, you very helpfully suggested that we go into what motivated us to become war tax refusers or resistors in the first place. And this took me back to many personal relationships, which I feel so grateful for. I've been incredibly fortunate. I want to say that community, I think, is actually indispensable for the long haul to be involved in war tax refusal. It can come in many different forms, and I don't ever think community is an end in itself, but it's a means toward an end, and it really can make a very great difference in sustaining war tax refusal. The other thing I want to say was so important for me and for kind of the group that I entered with, I suppose, was formation of study groups, really getting people together to study. And if you can't get people together, then at least form your own solo study sessions. But there's so plenty to study. And I was so glad Lincoln actually had the presence of mind to put his hands on the manual for war tax refusal. Maybe that could get shown on the screen. But if you if you need a book to start with, that's very, very serviceable. A bit dated, but there's an insert to bring it up to date. And then I think the practical guides for war tax refusal that can be found on the New Track website, and then certainly being in touch with a counselor. These are all really important ingredients. But I want to say that for me, timing it made a pretty important difference. I was a late bloomer. I knew enough in my college years to weep over the New York Times. I was very attracted to the Berrigans. I knew the Vietnam War was wrong, but the idea of actually doing something, of being an activist, was exotic. It was otherworldly. I couldn't put my hands around anything that could pull me in. But eventually, I was studying for a master's degree in religious education. It was a degree which at the time in the Roman Catholic Church would fully equip me to be a waitress. There was no practical use for this degree, really, because I was already a teacher in a Catholic high school. But I did reach a point wherein I just couldn't any longer piously sing, "Our God hears the cry of the poor," and know that I'm living in Hyde Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Chicago. I wasn't wealthy, but I was living in a very well-endowed area, and I rarely ever saw anyone who was needy. And so that cognitive dissonance finally was more than I could live with. And I knew about a group that was doing a soup kitchen on the north side and had a house of hospitality and shelters. And so I remember taking the red line up to the north side, knocking out through the grating over a window of the church basement, and people came upstairs, welcomed me in, and I was cutting onions with some of the most interesting people possible. And maybe 2 months later, I moved into that neighborhood. So I was very lucky. I landed within a community of people who had figured out how they could align their lives with their deepest values. And there was so much to learn, but so much to do as well, because this was a neighborhood where at the time I was earning a $7,000 salary teaching religion in a Catholic high school. But I was the most highly paid person on my block. And many people were taking their meals regularly at various soup kitchens. Many people had no homes in which to live. For children growing up in that setting, it was quite difficult. The prison industrial complex was beginning to form up in the United States. The United States was in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. Both sides had nuclear weapons aimed at each other. And I sort of matriculated, I suppose, into teaching at a Jesuit college prep school. My salary went up, and it was at that point I sort of talked myself into believing that I couldn't pay for weapons. And I had become close friends with Carl Meyer. And Carl radicalized a whole group of us in the neighborhood, so that there were many of us who finally reached a point where we thought, that's it, we're not going to pay taxes. So I remember going to the treasurer of this school where I taught, saying, "John, could you lower my salary beneath the taxable income?" And he was utterly flabbergasted. How are you going to do this? What about the IRA? And I thought he meant the Irish IRA. And I said, "Oh, no, I'm a pacifist." But finally, the Jesuits were quite good about going along with this idea. And several of us who had become war tax refusers pooled the money that we didn't take. And our employers said, just tell us where you want it to go. And we bankrolled Central America activism for quite a few important years. And they were important because people were fleeing from dictatorships and ghastly, grotesque situations the United States was causing in Central American countries. And so it was just constant reinforcement for why we didn't want to pay for war. I was positive, and actually I still am. I would give money to the mafia sooner than I would give it to governments that develop, sell, store, and use weapons of mass destruction like the ones that I've seen in successive war zones, or that hold the nuclear trigger basically to the heads of everybody else in the world. So I was lucky to be a late bloomer, because by the time I ever started into war tax refusal, I had had some time. It was a luxury, really, to resolve some issues in my life. Now, I'm going to speak very personally. I decided that I would not bear a child as a biological mother. I made that decision. It was a conscious decision. I had married Carl, and I was a stepmother to his 3 children, but they were really already well formed, and I was more like a big sister. I love babies. The woman next door is going to give birth, or maybe she already did today, and I'm so excited. Babies are a miracle. But I don't think I could have been a parent and be a war tax refuser and be involved in going to prisons and war zones. I don't know that that would have mixed very well. So that was a conscious decision on my part. I want to emphasize that we must reject any sense of hierarchy in our movement and in our communities. There's no one-way street. There's no this way is better than the other way. There's no I'm more emeritus than you are. There's no emeritus. We're all in a boat. And I think we must really practice radical egalitarianism. The other thing that I did decide was to leave teaching, and that meant going without health insurance. And that was maybe something that actually made me a little healthier, because I had to figure out how to live my life as healthfully as I could, knowing that I didn't have some kind of cushion with health insurance. And I can say that the desire not to be part of the status quo within the United States psychologically was very, very important to me. And war tax refusal enabled me, at least in some small way, to say that I wasn't part of that mainstream system. So I would readily say the IRS was like my spiritual director. If you decide that you're going to really not pay the United States government taxes, then you can't own a lot of things that people think you have to have. So I never learned how to drive a car. I've never owned a home, been happy to live in community with others. And I have to say, I have no regrets. It did get a little bumpy for me as I hit my 60s, because now I have Social Security. There was a point when I really needed to go on Medicaid, and that was easy because I didn't own anything, but my relationship with Voices for Creative Nonviolence was that was difficult, because we didn't take salaries, but we did have monies that people entrusted to us, and I was connected to that. So that took some resolving. But otherwise, I think it's been a pretty smooth ride for me in terms of war tax refusal. I want to especially say how important personal relationships have been. And I wish that for everybody else who's listening or who may at some point decide to consider war tax refusal. So thank you for listening to me.
Kathy, thank you so much for your wonderful words and for sharing your experiences of how you came to war tax resistance and some of the difficulties that you've had during during your many years of experience doing this practice. I did want to, Kathy had mentioned this book, kind of an introduction to war tax resistance, but it really has everything you need to know, history and practices. And so it's called War Tax Resistance, A Guide to Withholding Your Support from the Military. It's actually put out by War Resisters League, which is different from Nutric, but we do sell it on our website. So because it is a few years older, but it comes with an insert with up-to-date information, we sell it on our website for $5. So anyone who's interested can check that out. Our next panelist will be Erica Leigh. Erica Leigh has been a war tax resister since 2009. She has been active in Newtrick as an administrative committee member, a member of our other various committees, and was Newtrick's paid social media consultant for 5 years. She is currently a professional bike mechanic and anti-racist advocate. So here is Erica.
Thanks, Lincoln, and thank you, Kathy. It feels hard to follow Kathy. Kathy was actually the featured speaker at the first Newtrick conference I went to in November 2008 in Eugene, Oregon. And as always, it's a pleasure to hear and learn from Kathy and also from all of you here today. So so I became a war tax resistor, and I kind of like 2008, 2009, like I basically was a war tax resistor from the moment I first met everybody in Newtrick, but didn't have the opportunity to start resisting until 2009. But I had heard about war tax resistance in several different contexts before that time. So it was something that took a little while to kind of percolate into my head. But I wanted to share a couple of those personal connections that like helped push me toward resisting war taxes. In college in around 2001, I worked on an alternative student newspaper, and we received a grant from the Nonviolent Action Community of Cascadia, or NAC, which is a group that supported war tax resistance, and at the time ran one of those funds that Kathy mentioned that pooled money from war tax resistors and granted it out to various causes. That was called the Conscience and Military Tax Campaign, which is now part of the People's Life Fund in Northern California. But asking for and receiving that grant of refused tax money helped out my publication in a big way. We were a very low budget publication. So that money went to amazing and better use than bombs and weapons and bases. Another person who made a really big impact on me was a member of my Food Not Bombs group when I served with Food Not Bombs. One member of the group was a refugee from Sri Lanka, and through getting to know him, he explained that he didn't want to earn any money in the United States because he would have to pay taxes on that money that would go to war. And of course, he had a very personal and traumatic experience with war. So he only took jobs where he was compensated in ways other than money. For example, he worked in a homeless shelter where he was given food and board. And eventually he wanted to move to Sweden, which was a country he said he would feel comfortable paying taxes to because of the relatively low level of militarization and high social spending. But his life was very limited in certain ways because of this choice that he made never to pay for war. However, he also didn't speak of those limitations. Those limitations were a manifestation of his conscience and something that he chose in order to live out his values. Unfortunately, we've lost touch over the years, but I hope that, he's been able to, find things that contribute to his safety and well-being. Eventually, I found out about Newtrick, and I read all these stories posted on David Gross's The Picket Line blog about different war tax resistors who were living out their values in this very principled way. And I'm a person to whom that sort of like action really appeals. Like, I want to live in accordance with my values. I want to not be a hypocrite to the degree that I am able. And of course, the idea of paying for militarism, which I don't support. And I'd been against the war in Afghanistan after 9/11 and had participated in some anti-war action. So these stories really spoke to me. And as I said, the first time I went to a Newtrick gathering was in November 2008. And after meeting people at that conference, I knew that I would have the support around me and the knowledge around me to help me live out those values. And with that community support, I became a war tax resistor. And that's looked a lot of different ways for me over the years. I think an important thing to know about war tax resistance is its flexibility and the different ways that people can choose to resist. At certain times, I've been a relatively low income resistor and not earned enough money to owe income taxes. At the time that I joined Newtrick, I was making more money. So I tried to reduce my taxable income through a mixture of deductions for healthcare, educational expenses at times, retirement savings accounts, that sort of thing, and then refuse to pay the rest. I've been self-employed at times, which means that the choice of whether to pay Social Security or Medicare has been, taxes has been the choice on me. And during those times, I typically didn't owe income taxes because I was actually making relatively little, but I still refused to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes through not wanting to give money to the government. And that's a choice that people make different decisions about. Today, I'm a bike mechanic and I have a job. So that means that Social Security and Medicare taxes are deducted from my paycheck, but I've set up my W-4 form so that no money is withheld from my paycheck each time. So it's my choice at tax time whether to pay, and I've always chosen not to pay. I file my taxes accurately, but I do not give the government money. I do not want to pay for those bombs, for those weapons, for those military bases. And at first, that was my my major motivation, is just like opposition to militarism and military spending. And I think over the years, I've come to see how many systems are interconnected with militarism, and things like policing and prisons and border militarization, all these other systems that are wrapped up with militarism and manifestations of the same desire to conquer and control through violence rather than through nonviolent, egalitarian, non-hierarchical solutions that are, fundamentally about peace and justice. So my reasons now for being a war tax resistor, I think, have changed a little bit because, although I was, opposed to state violence, I think I would say that my primary reason was the military and the incredible harm caused by the Iraq War in particular was a big motivation for me. And today, as I am doing a lot more work in anti-racism and specifically around migrant justice as well, I am seeing the incredible violence enacted on migrants to this country through immigration detention, through militarized borders, through the violence of the Border Patrol, who, by the way, all this like border and immigration stuff is through the Department of Homeland Security. So it's like these issues are viewed as sort of like security. They're already militarized causes. They've decided to view immigration as a threat to national security. As someone whose father is an immigrant, whose great-grandparents were all immigrants. My grandfather was an immigrant. This is just an anti-human way of sorting the world. So for me now, I would say that being a war tax resistor is also about sort of standing in solidarity with migrants and standing against militarism in every form that it comes across in society, in every form of state violence, and looking toward a future that's about, you know, freedom, freedom of movement, freedom of, you know, freedom throughout all aspects of our lives, and freedom from government control of how we live. So I really encourage folks to investigate and learn more about how this violence that war tax resistance is refusing kind of permeates all aspects of our lives, not just the military, which is of course, you know, an enormous expenditure, and to think about, you know, how can we live our lives in a way that's more just and also more interconnected to the people around us.
All right, thank you, Erica, for sharing that your own story of coming to war tax resistance, and for those important connections of how our federal government affects the lives of people both inside and outside of our borders. Next on our panel, we'll be hearing from Sam Yerger. He is a war tax resistor, activist, and mechanic informed by his Christian anarchist convictions. He is a community organizer with Neighborhood Anarchist Collective and Lane Company Mutual Aid on stolen Kalapuya land. So here is Sam.
Thank you, Lincoln. Lane County, Mutual Aid. Let's see. Yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you so much for Kathy and Erica, your testimony. And I never realized how much Erica and I have in common until just now. Yes, both mechanics. But yeah, I've been on this road since around the same time, around 2008 or so, when I moved into the Catholic Worker in Los Angeles. And back then, I was a war tax resistor, but I had no idea what that meant, and I had no appreciation for groups like Nutric, because as Kathy was saying, it's easier to do this when you're in community, and I was back then, and it was not until I moved out of the Catholic Worker House and got a regular job that I realized how difficult war tax resistance can be. I think that we had a similar book to what Lincoln showed, but I think it was an even older version of it, and that's what we based our initial conversations on when we decided to do war tax resistance, from like as when you're out working a normal wage slave job. So yeah, that was something that and also I have to say, I did not appreciate the paperwork to do taxes back then. So it was very easy for me to just like, oh, let's just do it this way. This looks good, you know, forget about it, and then not file. And just kind of, we had some conversations with some people that have done it before, and they're like, you know, just it's better just to lay low and not send a letter, and not then you don't have to worry as much. We did that for many years, but increasingly it didn't feel right. We saw our future and said, well, we can't just do this. We can't just do this laying low thing forever. So we decided to come out with with what we'd been doing, and we filed 10 years of tax returns in 1 year. And so ever since then, we've been inundated with letters from the IRS about different tax years and different things that we owe them. And that can be very scary. And that's something that Nutrit can definitely help with. But it's something that I am reminded of again and again is that the part of the federal government is just trying to be scary, just trying to be intimidating, and that can be something that is often overlooked by people, and it is scary. So to get those letters, but I resist war taxes. I resist all taxes, really, because of all these connections. War, like what Erica was saying, war is connected with the cops. It's connected to the prisons. It's connected to the death penalty, to even to homeless sweeps that are happening in my community, fossil fuel infrastructure, these monocrop food subsidies. They're all, I would say that most of what the government spends their money on could be spent in a better way. So it doesn't matter if Trump's in office, it doesn't matter if Biden's in office. They're really on the same team, and that's the oppression of the federal government. And like I was saying, I lived at the Catholic Worker in LA, and that's kind of where I learned about, or where I was first revealed all of these things, and just learning about the military-industrial complex, and I earned $15 a week every day or every week at the Catholic Worker, and that was it was in cash, so no worries. It was, like I said, it was an easy thing to do at the Catholic Worker, was to be a war tax resistor. Yeah, and then starting to make my own money was when it obviously became more complicated. And now that I've gone through that and have dealt with all of the letters from the IRS, like dealing with it in the sense that emotionally, it's something that is, it's I don't know what I'm saying. Oh, sorry, I gotta speak louder. I moved twice, and I was always making money wherever I went, and so now I'm at a place where I can't do that anymore. I don't want to file my taxes anymore, and so I'm trying to earn money by not having tax forms at all, W-2s, 1099s. These things are what I'm trying to avoid ultimately. So I am a mechanic. I work on people's cars, and they pay me, and I don't make a lot, but fortunately I have circumstances where I don't have to make a lot, and so yeah, I would just encourage people to remember that there is a large network of people to gather information from, and there's, like Lincoln said, there's a lot of experience, even on this panel. That's something that it has really helped me, especially over the last few years when it was really scary to get those letters. So it's just like, yeah, like, and I guess it comes back to what Kathy was saying about community. That's what it takes to do this. You cannot do this on your own, because I would imagine getting 10 letters a day, and that would scare anybody enough to say, okay, I'll give in. I'm gonna call them, or I'm gonna set up a payment plan or something. And so yeah, talk to people. Don't be afraid to reach out. It's the most important part of more tax resistance, especially if you don't live in a community like that. And we need everyone. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Sam, thank you for sharing your words of wisdom and your own struggles, and how you've adapted your life to try to unplug from those systems that you want to refuse involvement with. So it's good to hear those words and those experiences. So our last two speakers are Charlie Hurst and Maria Smith. Charlie Hurst began his war tax resistance in 1978, the first year after he began pastoring a small Presbyterian congregation in inner city Baltimore. His resistance is deeply rooted in his commitment to practice gospel nonviolence. His experiences in the war zones of Nicaragua as a long-term witness for peace volunteer, 3 years in a favela in Recife, Brazil, and his current ministry to African-American men who have been experiencing chronic homelessness and or returning from incarceration inform his resistance. Regarding Maria Smith, Maria Smith's father was a career soldier serving in Vietnam and Laos during her childhood, who made clear that racial injustice left him few paths. He cultivated her curiosity about justice and intuition about the logic of peace and illogic of war. She began her war tax resistance in 1985 after she met and began dating Charlie, who she married in 1986. Her resistance has been fortified by her experiences in Nicaragua, documenting Contra attacks against civilians, living in a de facto war zone in Recife, and witnessing the abomination of poverty and violence in Cleveland, in her work as an attorney with the Legal Aid Society. So here are Charlie and Maria.
Thank you, everyone, for all you've shared and for inviting us to be part of this. As I mentioned, I'm a pastor, and my war tax resistance comes from my faith and how I understand the gospel. I don't see how the gospel permits violence in any form. And so that was in seminary kind of an academic kind of issue. But then I graduated, started pastor, or was an assistant at this small inner city church in Baltimore. And I realized, well, I'm going to start getting a paycheck. And so what does this mean now? Is this talk about nonviolence real, or isn't it? And so like Erica, clergy are considered self-employed. And so I'm in control of the money. And so the IRS wants it 4 times a year. So I decided, no, I couldn't pay for war and for violence and for the incredible military budget that this country had. And so I determined that I would only send them half of what was owing, because that was roughly what the military budget was. And kind of jotted a few notes on the tax form. Back in those days, you could write on your tax form. It wasn't frivolous. And then also sent a letter along explaining my faith and why I was doing this. And so that's what I started doing. And then Maria and I have been doing this for a number of years. We've been collected on a couple of times through our bank accounts, and we had a car taken at one point, but it hasn't really been that rough when you consider what a number of people have to deal with. There have been a couple of times when Other people have been really important in their understanding and support. When we were in Brazil with Mennonite Central Committee, they got several letters from the IRS wanting what little money MCC made available to us. And Mennonite Central Committee said, no, that was our conscience, and they were not gonna collect on or heed the wishes of the IRS. I was pastoring a small church in Cleveland at one point, and they were sending letters to the church council indicating that if they didn't withhold money from my salary and send them, that they could individually be responsible for what was owed me. And that was in discussion. Then Marie and I went to Brazil, but the church council had said, no, they were not going to do that. That was, again, that was between, it was a matter of conscience. And later the IRS backed off of actually going to court with them. But their support was just so important, because these were just, low-income inner city people. But they understood what matters of conscience were about. Later on, we decided that we wanted to have a little bit more personal interaction, not just matters of letters. So we asked for a hearing with the IRS at one point, which they granted. And of course they said, well, we could come ourselves and maybe bring an attorney if we wanted, but that's all. But somehow we were able to convince the IRS that we needed to bring along some friends who could help explain what our tax resistance was about. So we went down the IRS office with about 6 other people from, we had a doctor who worked with the city hospital who could talk about the impacts of military spending on healthcare in the city. We had other people who had experiences with education, et cetera. And they shared what this was all about, and we did. And we also wanted to communicate that, part of nonviolence, we didn't view people as the enemy. And we wanted to be clear on communicating that. And that also that our quarrel wasn't with the IRS. Our quarrel was with the people who were determining that our government was going to spend $750 billion on the military. And so we left that, I think, people had at least a better understanding of what we were about. And people have said to us, sometimes have said to me, well, what good does it do? You don't affect, no policy ever changes. But that's not strictly the point. The point is you need to be faithful to what you believe. And if people stay faithful to what they believe, altogether, all those people sometimes could make some changes. But whether or not it's effective by itself isn't an issue. So we continue to be on that journey. Thank you.
So I'm going to close. I just wanted to make a couple of points. Before I married Charlie, I wanted to make sure that it was a reason of my conscience that I wasn't just adopting war tax resistance because it was something that was integral to his faith and his belief. And I guess on the spectrum of people that resist, we're probably more on the conservative end. We have always filed all our taxes. We fully report. We do not take advantage of the W-2 to undercount or any of that. We are totally transparent. We used to include our letter with our taxes, but the IRS told us that we risked $25,000 fine if we included some kind of letter with our taxes. So now we send it directly to the IRS commissioner. We've been doing that, I think, over the last 10 years. And so this year we got an interesting response. We basically have kind of a formula. Since the United States Supreme Court decided that the Hobby Lobby case, I always mention that the United States honors the First Amendment rights of people's faith as regarding the Affordable Care Act, but do not afford the same deference to people that cannot fully participate in giving their full amounts of their taxes because of this issue of it going towards war, especially to nuclear weapons, which probably any use would be a crime against humanity. And I don't say probably would be a crime against humanity. So we're fully transparent. And we do think that engaging and recognizing that there are human beings on the other side and that it does embrace the full amount of our commitment to nonviolence, which the whole of nonviolence is love. And if if you're motivated by anger or fear or disconnectedness, then you're not, I'm speaking for myself, then I feel like I'm not using the full force of love, which unites and is creative and is participatory. And so we always seek to engage, like Charlie used that example of one hearing where we brought forth how our military budget is basically robbing communities like Cleveland of the ability to educate its children, to make housing lead safe, to provide arts and livelihoods for people that really want to engage. I just wanted to say that 3 points about, we do it to make ourselves honest about our faith. We do it to make sure that we're holding our government accountable. And we do it because it reminds us that the most powerful force in the universe, what brought us here, what continues our life, is love. And weapons of destruction are the antithesis of that. So I wanted to close with this poem, and Kathy Kelly is a Rumi fan. Kathy Kelly is a Rumi fan, and I wanted to close with this very short poem called Be Love's Willing Slave. Come and be love's willing slave, for love's slavery will save you. Forsake the slavery of this world and take up love's sweet service. The free, the world enslaves, but slaves love grants freedom. I crave release from this world like a bird from its egg. Free me from this shell that clings. As from the grave, grant me new life. O love, O quail in the free fields of spring, widely sing songs of joy. So, thank you for listening, and we encourage people to examine their conscience. This isn't an act to undermine the United States government. It is an act of freely giving, of saying that there is a better way. We have always expressed to people that in the IRS that we would pay more in taxes. We believe in a communal pot, that we believe in a connectedness. We believe in healthcare for all. And we believe that the enormous military budget is counter to our faith, undermines the security of our country and the world, and undermines and denies the humanity of people involved.
All right, thank you so much, Maria and Charlie. Yeah, and thank you so much for really, I think, highlighting the roles that integrity and love can play, and how in your, war tax resistance, it's always been very strongly connected to the communities that you live in and how you see the federal budget affecting those around you and those that you live and work with on a daily basis. So we have some time for questions. We have a few questions so far. I'll just go in order that we got the questions. So the first person did direct it towards Kathy, but they also asked it while Kathy was speaking. So Kathy, you can take it, or anyone can take it, but it's kind of a broad question. How do you prevent Social Security dollars from going to the IRS?
I'm one of the people who lowered my salary beneath the taxable income and didn't file for many, many, many years. I filed for the first time now that I am getting Social Security, but I don't owe any taxes, so I didn't mind filing. But as I understand it, the monies that are taken out for Social Security and FICA are, if you could sort of almost imagine it as an escrow account. It's not like when we present the pie chart of how much money the federal government is taking out of our taxes, that Social Security money is separate from that. But I'd like to leave it to someone else to speak about a decision not to pay Social Security. I didn't resist that when I was working for wages.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So yeah, when I've had the choice to refuse to pay Social Security and Medicare, I have made that choice. In part, it's like symbolic. I'm not giving money to the government for any purpose because of what they do with most of the money that is given out. Another part, and Kathy mentioned that, like, the Social Security is ostensibly a separate pool of money. And so for some of us who choose not to voluntarily pay Social Security or Medicare, it's because we still think of it as money that's going to the government that could help in some way financially support all the other things that they're also doing. Just as, if they have this pool of money for Social Security that I give them, then, there's potential for expenditures to go a different way. I think there are different debates about practically how that works. But yes, Social Security money, if you pay it, if you're paying it through your tax return, like if you're self-employed, then you are writing a check to the IRS for your Social Security, Medicare taxes. But if that money is like taken out of your, if that money is taken out of your paycheck, you're not writing the check to the IRS for it. People have different philosophies about what's acceptable to them in terms of cooperation with those different systems. So yeah, we have tons of resources on our website, newtrick.org, about decisions like that and about like how Social Security works and stuff. So I would definitely also encourage you to check out those resources or get in touch with the Newtrick office if you have more questions.
Thank you, Kathy. And yeah, thank you, Erica. And yeah, on the Newtrick website, we do have a booklet that's specifically meant for people who are self-employed. And that is one of the decisions that self-employed war tax resistors need to make, is whether they want to be paying into Social Security and Medicare. Another question, not to anyone in particular, but maybe we can hear from a couple of folks on the panel, is the question, is spreading the word about war tax resistance part of your practice, or is that something that's more private or personal to you? Sure, Sam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, yeah, I'm not. It's not something that I would say to anybody in the first day or two of meeting them. So yeah, I'm not real vocal about mine. It also depends on if there's other people in your household who how they feel about it. So you have to think about that too.
Sure. Kathy?
I have to say that in more recent years, I have not been so ready to recommend war tax refusal unless there's a chance to really develop a relationship with someone and to encourage people to be very clear about whether or not there's water in the pool before they dive in, because I think it's crucial that people understand that with the technology that exists today, the IRS will quite likely, as Sam would testify, find you if they have any paperwork to work on. And so are you ready to say that you'll never pay that tax? Because if somebody ends up being charged penalties and interest, they could actually feasibly give more money to the government than they would otherwise have given. And so it's really important for people to be able to sort of think about those realities. So I encourage war tax refusal, but and I've never been secretive about my own, but if I'm, with an audience and there's not really much of an opportunity for follow-up, like for instance, if a university invites me to talk to students, I'm a little bit more, what would I say? Not hesitant, but wanting to. I want to be careful about what I'm inviting people into. But I'm so interested to hear what others on the panel think about that.
I think we'll go next. Well, we've always been very public. Again, I say that we try to follow all of the rules, and we're not trying to undercount our income or anything like that. We calculate everything accurately. We've been interviewed for newspaper articles and quoted in various public forums about this, but like Kathy, we do it as a reason of our own personal conscience to speak to the larger society for our own conversion and commitment, and to dream the possibility of a world where we're not using $750 billion for weapons, and to kind of hold those numbers in our head. I think a lot of people, and also because we totally believe that we have to have an effective tax system in order to fund the social programs that we need. We've lived in Brazil is in reality a wealthy country. It has a very ineffective tax system. And so it doesn't use its resources the way it could use if people participated in a tax system. So that's not our goal. Our goal is to speak to publicly about the large, unconscionable, immoral amount of the US budget spent on armaments and weapons, especially nuclear weapons. But so I like Kathy, we would not encourage anyone to do it. We've never been able to own a home. It was very difficult to raise our child with this sword of Damocles over our heads. When cell phones first came out, we couldn't even get a cell phone contract because we had IRS liens against us. So it's a commitment that has to come from the heart, that I renewed after coming back from Nicaragua and seeing how people's lives had been taken from them, that I thought I never in good conscience could ever fully participate in US dollars going to that war machine. But I do think it's something that has to be a matter of conscience. It's not a tool or a toy or a movement. So.
Yeah, and we're not always talking about it, but people who've known us for a long time know that we do tax resistance and why we do it. And when there's an opportunity or a need to share, we do, but we don't make a point of it.
Yeah.
We have always tried to communicate to the IRS in some way why we're doing this. We want it clearly understood so that other folks understand why. It's harder to communicate with the IRS now because they don't want letters, they don't want any kind of communication, but we still try to communicate because we want people to understand why we're doing this. It's important that we're saying no, and saying no is as important as saying yes sometimes.
We do send letters to our senators and our representatives also so that they are aware that this is our position.
Yeah, I can add. Yeah, I mean, I tell people that I'm a war tax resistor when it comes up. Like Sam said, it's there, not something that I'm going to volunteer right away. But I definitely, when it has come up with folks, I've had a lot of amazing opportunities to chat with people about why I make this choice. And to me, one of the values of those times that I have been able to have conversations with people in my communities is not necessarily that people around me are going to become war tax resistors. And also, I'm not really worried about anybody like ratting me out to the IRS. The IRS knows. But I think sharing stories of resistance can be motivating to folks to choose their own form of resistance. And, you know, war tax resistance is a choice with certain risks that people may not be willing to take, but they may be willing to take other risks because that they know that, you know, they have examples of people in their lives who are taking different sorts of risks. In my experience, the IRS is a really arbitrary enforcement organization. So I'm coming up on, or maybe let's see, have I passed already? I have to look at my tax forms, but it's possible that a year of my tax resistance has just dropped off for the first time. There's a 10-year statute of limitations on IRS collection from the moment that your return is calculated. So if you file, then it's, you know, when you file and the IRS accepts your tax return, or if you don't file, it's when they make a calculation on your behalf of what they think you owe, and if you don't, contest it. Yeah, the IRS knows a lot of information about me that it could be using to try to collect on some of the money that I owe, but their enforcement mechanisms are also extremely weak these days. This is the point at which, you know, the sort of Republican dismantling of the IRS can, work in a war tax resistor's favor. And, you know, different people have different thoughts about whether that's a good thing or not. But certainly in my case, I feel like I have received only letters and bunches of letters and one attempt to levy a bank account that had been closed 2 years prior. And so their enforcement mechanisms are not super competent. Like, you got to be ready for, you know, attempts to collect. But, you know, many of the things that people are afraid about when it comes to the IRS are, you know, things that you have the opportunity to think about the level of risk you're willing to take, and also that you can choose to take a different type of risk, or reduce your risk or increase your risk at different times, depending on what's comfortable to you. So there are a lot of strategies there. And like, I respect folks who like choose to be both like super turbo public about their resistance, and those who are keeping it private for various reasons. But like, definitely, I think it's important for people to know what we're out here doing, because we are trying to make a difference as well as adhere to our consciences.
Thank you to each of our panelists for tackling that question. And obviously, by being on this panel, each of you are familiar with some degree of sharing your war tax resistance practice and witness and struggles. And maybe just to add a little bit on to what was said, because we do have folks here that have been active in war tax resistance during different decades. And Erica had noted some of the inactivity of the IRS. And so more just as an informational note that, yes, with the incoming of the Tea Party into Congress in 2010, we've definitely seen a weakening of the IRS. We've seen their staff cut by about 30% over the last 10 years. And according to the last set of numbers that the IRS released about in a given year, what they expect to not be paid to the IRS. So there's the amount that's not paid and that they know they're owed. And then there's the amount that they expect to get out of that amount. And so for the last year that they've calculated, they know that $450 billion of taxes was not paid to them, and they're owed $450 billion for that year. They expect in the next 10 years to collect 50 billion of that. So that's 50 billion of 450 billion. So there is that sense like, for some people, they are more collectible and may be collected upon, but obviously the vast majority of unpaid federal income taxes are never collected. The IRS does not have the ability to do so right now. Though Congress could change their funding of the IRS, and that could change next year. So anyways, more of an aside. We have another question. This is more of a, this is one of those age-old questions that's very difficult to answer. Maybe it might be more up Erica's alley if she has an opinion, having worked with Nutric as a consultant in the past. How many war tax resistors are there in the United States?
So yeah. Oh, do you want to go ahead, Sam?
Just saying, not enough.
Yes, well, definitely not enough, whatever the number is. Frequently, I have heard a couple of numbers, 8,000, 10,000, frequently used by folks in our network. But the truth is we don't know. There are a lot of folks, I know Lincoln probably gets calls from people, and emails from people on a regular basis. And we don't, we don't keep track or count in that way. I think there are more individuals kind of doing this than there used to be. Sort of group war tax resistance was definitely like more powerful in the 70s and 80s. And 90s of war tax resistors organizing in groups. So yeah, not really a great number. 8,000 to 10,000 is a number that we throw around. I personally think it has to be more because of the number of war tax resistors or people who are former war tax resistors who I've met over the years. So I think that there are a fair number of people who are off our radar, but it's just hard to, it's hard to know because yeah, a lot of people don't necessarily want to be found or counted or any of those things. Definitely understandable given that we're, resistors who are refusing to pay some portion of their taxes are, putting themselves against the law. Well worth it in my opinion, but that's the reality.
Thank you, Erica. I'll just add, I did look at I think Erica's also right that, it was different in the 70s, 80s. If you wanted to be a war tax resistor, you couldn't go on the internet and find out all this information. Now, all of our resources are available for free on our website. And I did recently look at our web stats for 2020, and I believe that our web provider said we had 35,000 unique visitors to our website, and that each one of those unique visitors looked at 9 different pages on our website. So of course, that doesn't mean they're all war tax resistors, and there's plenty that don't go online and just read the old books, but there definitely appears to be an interest of people that are taking advantage of our free resources. And I sometimes only hear about them when they get a scary letter from the IRS and decide to call the office. So another question that came in, someone appreciated what Kathy Kelly was sharing about her experience with healthcare and asked, are there currently any communal funds for healthcare costs, or are there options for pursuing healthcare outside of the usual systems? I don't know if any of our panelists want to take that question on.
My own situation is a bit unusual. Over the years, I did go to other countries almost always because of human rights violations in other countries or because the United States was waging war there. But I guess I just have to confess that I've had dental work done in Iraq, and if I had medical questions in the years once from 2009 till 2019 going to Afghanistan, I asked them of the medical doctor who was the mentor for the Afghan Peace Volunteers, and I have had just a wide variety of people who, as healthcare professionals, would answer my questions if I had them. I did. I did have 2 surgeries for diseased tissue covering both of my lungs, but those happened at a time when I was still getting health insurance, even though I had lowered my salary beneath the taxable income. So I'm not myself aware of groups that deliberately provide healthcare specifically for war tax refusers, but there are some very wonderful clinics. For instance, the House of Grace Clinic associated with the Catholic Worker in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the clinic that's associated with Guadalupe House in California. And so I think that if people pursue some of the networks of Catholic worker houses, for instance, they might be able to find healthcare professionals who don't charge for their services.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. I don't know if any, oh, Sam, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just that I hate insurance companies with a passion, and so I would love to get more resources on this question myself. But from what I've looked into, there are these health cost sharing networks that are around, and most of them are religious affiliated, and you have to sign some kind of a religious covenant or something. But I think there are 1 or 2 that are not like that. So those might be an option. I looked into it a little bit, but ultimately I ended up just going with like some bronze Obamacare plan, which is outrageously expensive and not worth it at all.
Any other thoughts from the panel? All right, so I think, and I know that is a question, particularly before Obamacare, but I'm sure there are instances after the implementation of Obamacare where war tax resistors, in order to find more reasonable surgeries, have definitely traveled to other countries to have those surgeries done.
Lincoln, I would like to add that one of the points of being able to use this witness is to say to our citizenry, which we're actually the ones that are responsible for how these funds are distributed, that we could have universal health care. We could honor healthcare as a human right. We could have education, secondary education, and post university education without exorbitant loans if we did not have this huge military budget. So a lot of these things really do go back to the whole point in the first place, is identifying what is this huge expenditure and is it worth it? Does it express who we are? Does it create the world that we'd like to have?
Thank you, for sharing on that. And yeah, where our tax dollars go definitely shows what the priorities of the federal government happen to be. Another question, so this one's obviously from a war tax resistor, and curious if anyone has had an increase in letters from the IRS this month. This person got a bunch of letters threatening, that they owe and threatening collection for years past from 2011 to the present.
Did, but not this month. It's some few months ago. We thought that what it was is Erica mentioned there's a 10-year statute of limitations, but we thought they were sending these letters to reset the clock on those years.
Could you say more about that? Because I don't think you can reset the clock by sending a letter, but they could be hoping that you'll voluntarily pay up.
Well, we
with a
thought they
reminder.
were going to actually collect.
But we
Yeah.
did get letters for about 10 years worth of withheld taxes.
Yeah,
And
I've gotten,
all in one mailbox.
yeah, they love sending you an individual letter for each tax year, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're taking any more particular action on you. They just do that sometimes. I've also gotten the like pile of letters. I think it was 8 because that was how many years of resistance I had up to that point. Once I got those once. So I think a lot of resistors have that experience of getting a pile of letters at one point or another. And some people get that pile of letters every year and some people don't. So they've been real slow to follow up on this year's taxes, but then the tax deadline was later. So I guess that's probably why, but I just got my usual letters this year.
Yeah, I don't. When the letters come in, like I don't know, like we sent our tax forms in for 10 years of taxes. It was a huge envelope. Actually, I think we sent them separately, but it's just so random what years they send letters for. Once it was 2010, and then next it was like 2019, and so it's like, yeah, it seems totally random. And I probably get a letter every 3 months now, but I used to get them a lot. Yeah.
All right, so we're nearing the end of our session for this afternoon. There just were a couple more comments. I won't read them because I think everyone can see them from Chrissy, but she left some comments regarding healthcare and one example up in Ithaca, and for those that take more of an anarchist view of trying to make way in our society, you know, the importance of self-care and the difficulty of healthcare. So maybe, yeah. So at this point, maybe there don't appear to be any other questions. So if anyone has maybe some final thoughts from each of our panelists, just about maybe anything that's come to your mind or from the questions or whatever you want to leave us with for today.
Now, Lincoln, I do want to say that Monday is a day for the world to say no to war against Yemen. And the ways in which carrying over from the Trump administration and the Obama administration, the practices of the United States continue to punish children and punish them to death through that very tortuous death by starvation continues. And I think that it was so wonderful that the world could celebrate the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But you know, we are outliers in the United States. And so I'd just like to conclude my time by recalling that in 1991, I was part of a group that was camped out in the desert in Iraq to interpose ourselves between the warring parties, Iraq and the United States. And we certainly didn't stop that war, but it gave us an introduction to beginning to understand much more about the consequences of military and economic war. So we were in Amman, Jordan, and there was kind of a tense hall of Palestinians living in Jordan who had come to hear us, and who are these strange Americans? We had emerged out of Iraq, and they seemed you know, pretty uncertain about who we were. And then Kathy Boylan, who lives in Washington, D.C. at Dorothy Day House, stood up and she said she was a mother, I believe, of 4, and she gave her age and she gave her work life, and then she said, and I haven't paid my federal income taxes since whatever year. And the hall burst into applause. We're 6% of the world's population here in the United States. There may be many, many people who wouldn't find such easy agreement with war tax resistance and war tax refusal, but I think we can be assured that in the rest of the 94% of the world's population, there's probably a great deal of solidarity. Thank you.
I wanted to say, Kathy, thank you. And you've always been an inspiration to us and followed your travels. And we felt connected with the Afghan peace volunteers. And, you know, we wore the blue scarves, I think maybe 4 or 5 years trying to daily remember them. But you mentioned Dorothy Day, and I was impressed with Pope Francis mentioning Dorothy Day when he visited the United States Congress. And I'm hoping that if she is canonized, and I know that's another polemic, but if she is canonized, that one of the things that they recognize in her sainthood is that she was a war tax resistor. And even then she understood this military industrial complex, US participation in bringing death and destruction to other places, and we could choose otherwise. And for us, that if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, which is, you know, at the crux of who we are, that you really do have to think of the world and that no one can be your enemy. So if no one can be your enemy, you definitely can't starve them in Yemen, and you can't bomb them in Iraq and other places.
Kathy, you mentioned the woman who was applauded in Yemen. I think sometimes we get too much of a pass in the rest of the world. When we were in Nicaragua, you know, we were sometimes surprised how much we were welcomed given what our country was doing in Nicaragua. And people would say, oh, that's not you, that's your government. But, you know, that's too easy. That's not true. We can't take that pass. It is just our government, because we do let things go too easily. So I think in other places, they're willing to give us a pass that we don't deserve.
I think that's such an important point. I think the United States has the most powerful, expensive military in the world. And those of us who live here do have a responsibility to, you know, do something to try to make that, you know, that to try to reduce or eliminate this harm. And so I think of war tax resistance as one way that I can take that action, both through refusing to pay that money and also through redirecting the taxes that I don't pay to causes and people who, you know, need that money. You know, war tax resistance is not about self-enrichment. It's definitely about like creating a better world. And I know that the organizations and causes that I help fund through my redirected tax dollars, you know, as small as that amount may be, those organizations are putting that money to far better use than the IRS, the US government would put that small amount of money. And it you know, it makes a big difference in that way, as well as the sort of impact of being a public resistor and saying like, you know, I won't be complicit in this aspect of the machine. At the same time, trying not to get too wrapped up in personal purity, like I am free from the system because I don't pay. It is like a choice that many of us can make sacrifices in order to make, or in some cases have certain privileges that allow us to be able to more easily make the choice to be a resistor. But it's like part of, I think at its best, war tax resistance is part of like a community of actions and a community of different ways of approaching the problem that is the US military and US violence.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lincoln, for hosting this. And I just really appreciate Newtrick so much. And thanks to all of you who are out there doing great work, and thanks for everyone for listening to us today.
All right. Well, thank you again to each of our panelists, to Kathy Kelly and Erica Leigh, Sam Yerger, Maria Smith, and Charlie Hurst, and for sharing, taking time out of your days, but also sharing for what many people is a very, for all of us, whether we're public about it or not, sharing about your war tax resistance and how you came to that decision. It's always a personal decision for everyone to make. And so hearing those stories has been very wonderful. There have been comments in the Facebook stream thanking each of you for sharing your stories and showing their appreciation. And just a reminder, this will be staying up on our Facebook page as a video afterwards, so you can share it with others that missed it, that want to see it, want them to see it. We'll also be posting it to our YouTube channel this week, and throughout tax season 2021, we'll be updating our resources and providing new resources on our website. And for those folks that are perhaps interested in war tax resistance, but would prefer to talk to someone about it first, we do have a list of about 36 war tax resistance counselors. So those are war tax resistors that have done a little bit more in-depth training and are volunteers. They're willing to talk to folks about their situation and kind of see if this is right for you, and if you would want to do it, how it would work, how it would help you come to the decision of how it would work best for you. And so I have put a link in there to our list of war tax resistance counselors. So again, we have them in most states, and maybe post-COVID, you might be, if you want to meet with someone, maybe you can even meet in person and help build that community that came up again and again. Can be such an important part to sustaining our resistance in all that we do. So once again, thank you to our panelists. And here's to a wonderful and peaceful tax season. So have a great day, everyone.